Most people believe they get hurt because other people are cruel, manipulative, or powerful. They're wrong. The uncomfortable truth is this: nobody can control you until they learn how to predict you. Think about that for a moment. Every time you react instantly, defend yourself too quickly, explain more than necessary, or let your emotions show before your intentions, you're handing people a map to your mind. And once someone has that map, influencing you becomes surprisingly easy. Here's the question most people never ask. What if the real reason you keep getting frustrated, disrespected, manipulated, or emotionally wounded isn't because others are stronger than you, but because you're too easy to read? Machiavelli understood something about human nature that most people spend their entire lives missing. People don't gain power over you through force first. They gain power through information. They study your reactions. They identify your emotional patterns. They learn what triggers you, what flatters you, what scares you, and what makes you lose control. And the moment they can predict your next move, they already have an advantage. Look around carefully. The people who are hardest to manipulate are rarely the loudest, the richest, or the most aggressive. They're the ones who reveal the least. The ones who stay calm when others expect emotion. The ones who pause when others rush. The ones who never allow their feelings to become public instructions for other people to follow. Because the greatest form of protection isn't physical strength, it's psychological invisibility. And that's exactly what we're going to uncover today. In this video, you'll learn why emotional transparency makes you vulnerable, how manipulators identify your hidden pressure points, and how to develop a level of self-control that makes it extraordinarily difficult for anyone to influence, provoke, or hurt you. More importantly, you'll discover the subtle shift that transforms a person from emotionally reactive to psychologically untouchable. Once you understand this principle, you'll start seeing human interactions differently forever. Because when people can no longer predict your reactions, they lose the ability to control your direction. And that's where real power begins. Number 1. Why you keep getting hurt. Most men spend years blaming the wrong enemy. They blame toxic people, manipulators, fake friends, disloyal women, or ruthless co-workers. But the brutal truth is that most of the damage was never caused by their enemies. It was caused by their predictability. Think about it. How many times have you said, "I don't care," while secretly checking your phone every 10 minutes waiting for a reply? How many times have you acted calm on the surface while your mind was screaming for validation underneath? People notice more than you think, not because they're smarter than you, but because you're broadcasting your emotional state without realizing it. And once someone can read your emotions, they can influence your behavior. A delayed text, a cold response, a little disrespect disguised as a joke, a sudden withdrawal of attention. For most men, that's all it takes. The emotional reaction starts immediately. The mind races, the ego gets involved, the need to prove something appears. And from that moment forward, they're no longer acting strategically, they're reacting. That's where control begins, not with force, but with observation. Imagine a man sitting across from you. He says almost nothing. He simply watches. He watches what irritates you, what flatters you, what makes you defensive, and what makes you explain yourself. Within a few conversations, he knows more about your weaknesses than your closest friends. Because weakness rarely reveals itself through failure. It reveals itself through reaction. The dangerous people are not the ones who attack first. The dangerous people are the ones who study first. Most manipulation doesn't look like manipulation. That's why it works. Nobody walks into your life wearing a sign that says, "I'm trying to control you." Instead, they test small tests. A canceled plan, a dismissive comment, a delayed response, a contradiction. Not because they care about the event itself, but because they're measuring you. They're looking for the invisible strings attached to your emotions. And the moment they find one, they pull. The average man doesn't even notice the game. He thinks he's defending himself, explaining himself, proving his point. In reality, he's giving away intelligence. Every emotional outburst is information. Every defensive explanation is information. Every desperate attempt to be understood is information. And information becomes leverage. One of the biggest mistakes men make is over-explaining. Pay attention to this. Powerful men explain less, while insecure men explain everything. The more desperately you try to convince people you're right, the more you reveal where you're emotionally invested, and wherever you're emotionally invested, you're vulnerable. That's why silence makes people uncomfortable. Silence gives them nothing to measure, nothing to predict, nothing to manipulate. A man who reacts immediately is easy to control, but a man who pauses becomes dangerous, because that pause creates uncertainty, and uncertainty terrifies people who rely on psychological control. Machiavelli understood something most people never learn. Influence works best when the target doesn't realize influence is happening. That's why emotional triggers are so effective. They don't feel like traps, they feel like normal moments. But every moment is a test, and every reaction is an answer. The question is simple. Are you choosing your reactions, or are other people choosing them for you? Because the day you stop reacting automatically is the day you become difficult to move, difficult to pressure, difficult to manipulate, and for the first time in your life, difficult to hurt. Number 2, understanding human nature. Most men are not defeated by their enemies, they're defeated by their illusions. One of the most expensive illusions you'll ever carry is believing people operate according to the values they talk about. They don't, at least not consistently. And the sooner you understand that, the less disappointment will control your life. Let me ask you something. Have you ever helped someone repeatedly, only to watch them disappear the moment they no longer needed you? Have you ever stayed loyal to someone who replaced you without hesitation when a better opportunity appeared? Have you ever looked at a person's actions and thought, how could they do this after everything I did for them? If you have, then you've already had your first lesson in human nature. The problem wasn't what they did. The problem was the story you told yourself about why they wouldn't do it. Most people walk through life believing loyalty comes first, respect comes first, friendship comes first, friendship comes first. But when pressure enters the room, something else usually takes the throne. Self-interest. Not because people are evil, because people are human, and human beings have always followed incentives more consistently than ideals. Watch what happens when status is involved. Watch what happens when money is involved. Watch what happens when social approval is involved. Suddenly principles become negotiable, convictions become flexible, promises become temporary. The man who understands this isn't cynical. He's awake. The average man listens to words, but the strategic man studies patterns, because words cost nothing. Anyone can say, "I've got your back." Anyone can say, "You can trust me." Anyone can say, "I'm different." The real test comes when there's a price attached, when helping you becomes inconvenient, when staying loyal becomes costly, when telling the truth creates risk. That's where masks start slipping. That's where reality begins. I once heard a simple observation that reveals more about human nature than most psychology books. Don't watch how people treat you when they need you. Watch how they treat you when they no longer do. That's where the truth lies. Most men become emotional detectives. They obsess over a single event, one text, one argument, one betrayal, one rejection. But professionals in intelligence, negotiation, and power dynamics understand something different. Patterns matter more than incidents. A single action can be emotional, a repeated action is identity. Read that again. A single action can be emotional, a repeated action is identity. This is why powerful men stop asking, "Why did they do this to me?" That question creates victims. Instead, they ask, "What outcome were they trying to achieve?" That question creates clarity. Suddenly, the world starts making sense. You stop seeing betrayal, you start seeing incentives. You stop seeing disrespect, you start seeing status calculations. You stop seeing confusing behavior, you start seeing predictable human patterns. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago when he observed that people often protect their interests more fiercely than their emotions. Not because they're monsters, but because survival, advantage, security, and status are among the strongest forces in human behavior. Once you understand that, something changes inside you. You stop taking everything personally, and that's where real power begins. Because emotional men personalize everything. Strategic men analyze everything. One lives in constant disappointment. The other lives in constant awareness. The man who understands human nature isn't shocked when people change. He expects it. He isn't devastated when incentives shift. He notices it. He isn't blindsided by betrayal. He sees the conditions that made it likely long before it happens. That's the difference. The crowd reacts, the observer anticipates. And in every power dynamic, the man who anticipates always holds the advantage. Number 3, mastering your reactions. This is where most men lose. Not in the argument, not in the breakup, not in the negotiation, and not in the betrayal. They lose in the first 3 seconds after it happens. The text arrives, the disrespect lands, the criticism hits, the rejection appears, and before they've even thought about it, their emotions have already taken the steering wheel. That's the trap. Most men believe their biggest enemy is the person provoking them. It isn't. Their biggest enemy is the version of themselves that reacts automatically. Think about the last time someone got under your skin. Maybe it was a woman who suddenly became distant after weeks of attention. Maybe it was a coworker who subtly disrespected you in front of others. Maybe it was a friend who crossed a line and acted like nothing happened. What happened next? Your mind started writing stories. You replayed conversations. You imagined responses. You built entire arguments in your head. Meanwhile, the other person had already moved on with their day. That's the brutal reality. The moment someone can create emotional turbulence inside you, they occupy mental real estate they never paid for, and every minute you spend emotionally reacting is a minute you're no longer focused on your mission. This is why powerful men appear different, not because they feel less, but because they reveal less. The average man experiences an emotion and immediately expresses it. The dangerous man experiences an emotion and studies it first. That single difference changes everything, because provocation only works when it creates movement. Let me tell you something most people never realize. When someone insults you, they aren't always trying to hurt you. Sometimes they're trying to measure you. They're watching. Will he become defensive? Will he explain himself? Will he lose control? Will he need validation? The reaction is often more valuable than the insult itself. That's why emotional discipline is a form of power, not because it looks strong, but because it destroys information. When you remain composed, people lose access to your internal state. And when they lose access to your internal state, they lose accuracy. Suddenly, they don't know where your weaknesses are. They don't know what bothers you. They don't know which buttons to push. The game becomes dangerous for them. Machiavelli understood a principle that remains true today. The person who controls the tempo controls the interaction. Most men allow other people to set the tempo. An insulting comment speeds them up. A delayed reply speeds them up. A challenge speeds them up. Everything becomes reactive. Everything becomes emotional. Everything becomes predictable. But watch the man who has mastered himself. Pressure doesn't accelerate him. Urgency doesn't rush him. Provocation doesn't own him. He responds when he chooses, not when others demand it. And that difference creates authority. One of the most underrated forms of power is the pause, that small moment between stimulus and response. Most people never use it. They live like human reflexes. Someone presses a button, and they react. Someone challenges them, and they react. Someone ignores them, and they react. But inside that pause lies something rare: freedom. Because in that space, you get to decide. Do I engage? Do I ignore it? Is this a genuine problem? Or is this bait disguised as a problem? The stronger you become, the more you'll realize that not every battle deserves your attention. In fact, most don't. The cold truth is that selective engagement is power. Reacting to everything is weakness. The man who responds to every provocation becomes exhausted. The man who chooses his battles becomes untouchable. From this moment forward, stop treating your reactions as accidents. Treat them as strategic decisions. Because the man who masters his reactions eventually masters the room. And the man who masters the room rarely needs to raise his voice to do it. Number 4. Becoming unreadable. Most men reveal far too much. Not because they're weak, because they've been conditioned to believe transparency is always a virtue. It isn't. In power dynamics, excessive transparency is often self-sabotage. Let me show you something most people never notice. Have you ever met a man who talks endlessly about his future plans? The business he's building, the money he's about to make, the transformation that's coming, the goals he's chasing. At first, it sounds ambitious, but after a while, something feels off. Because truly dangerous men rarely advertise their intentions. They appear ordinary, right before they change their lives. The average man announces. The strategic man executes. And that difference changes how the world responds to them. Most people think opposition comes from enemies. Not true. A surprising amount of resistance comes from people who smile while quietly hoping you stay exactly where you are. The moment you reveal a new ambition, something strange happens. Advice appears. Doubt appears. Warnings appear. Questions appear. Suddenly everyone has an opinion. Not because they care, because your movement forces them to compare their life to yours. And comparison makes people uncomfortable. This is why becoming unreadable is not about being secretive, it's about protecting momentum. The truth is, every detail you reveal gives people material to work with. Tell someone what excites you, and they learn what motivates you. Tell them what hurts you, and they learn where to aim. Tell them what you're building, and they learn where to interfere. Most men don't get attacked because they're hated. They get attacked because they're predictable. Think about a poker table. The strongest hand isn't always the one with the best cards. It's often the player who reveals the least information. The slight smile, the nervous movement, the glance, the hesitation. Small leaks create massive advantages. Human interaction works exactly the same way. Every emotional display broadcasts data. Every over-explanation reveals priorities. Every attempt to be understood exposes psychological territory. That's why powerful people learn to separate feeling from display. Notice I didn't say they stop feeling. That's a fantasy. They still experience anger, disappointment, desire, frustration. But they stop broadcasting it. Their inner world remains active. Their outer world remains controlled. And that's where the power comes from. Because when people cannot read you, they become cautious. When they become cautious, they slow down. When they slow down, they make mistakes. And suddenly, the balance of power shifts. Have you ever noticed how some men walk into a room and immediately command respect without saying much? It's rarely because they're the loudest. It's because nobody can immediately figure them out. There's a psychological discomfort in uncertainty. Human beings crave predictability. They want to categorize you, understand you, place you in a box. The moment they can label you, they become comfortable. And comfortable people become careless. But when your intentions remain hidden, people stay alert. They pay attention. They watch their words. They second-guess their assumptions. That is influence without effort. Machiavelli understood that partial exposure creates vulnerability. A half-finished plan invites interference. A fully executed plan creates admiration. That's why strategic men share results, not intentions. Victory, not preparation. Completion, not anticipation. Social media has made this lesson even more important. Most people document every thought, every emotion, every setback, and every goal. They're building a public psychological profile for the world to study. Meanwhile, the strongest operators move differently. They disappear during construction, then reappear with the finished structure. Remember this, being unreadable doesn't mean becoming cold. It means becoming selective. You know exactly where you're going, you simply stop handing out the map. Structure inside, mystery outside, direction without disclosure, purpose without performance. That's the balance. And in a world where everyone reveals everything, the man who reveals less automatically becomes harder to influence, harder to manipulate, and far harder to stop. Number 5. Detaching from outcomes. This is where most men become slaves without ever realizing it. Not slaves to other people, slaves to a result. A woman they can't stop thinking about, a deal they desperately need to close, an opportunity they believe will change their life, or approval they think they must earn. The moment your happiness becomes dependent on a specific outcome, your power starts leaking, and people can smell it. Maybe not consciously, but they feel it. You've seen it before, the man waiting all day for one text message, checking his phone every few minutes, trying to act relaxed while his mind is running 100 different scenarios. What did I do wrong? Why hasn't she replied? Should I message again? At that moment, he thinks he's waiting for an answer. He's negotiating with his own emotional dependency, and dependency is expensive. Because the person who needs the outcome less almost always controls the interaction. That's one of the coldest truths you'll ever learn. The man willing to walk away has power, the man terrified of losing has pressure. And pressure changes behavior. It makes you accept things you normally wouldn't. It makes you tolerate disrespect. It makes you negotiate against yourself. It makes you betray your own standards just to avoid losing something you became attached to. Watch what happens when a man becomes obsessed with a specific result. His judgment starts narrowing, red flags become invisible, warning signs become excuses, bad deals suddenly seem reasonable, and poor treatment suddenly seems understandable. The mind becomes a lawyer defending its addiction. And that's what attachment really is, an emotional addiction disguised as commitment. The strongest men understand something most people never do. You perform best when you want the outcome, but do not need it. That's a completely different energy. You still pursue, you still compete, you still move aggressively toward your goals, but your identity isn't attached to the result. If it works, good. If it doesn't, you adjust. That mindset terrifies people who rely on leverage, because leverage only works when there is fear, and fear only exists when you believe you have no alternatives. Think about negotiations. Think about dating. Think about business. Think about status. The individual who can genuinely stand up and leave the table immediately becomes harder to manipulate. Not because they're stronger, because they're free. Most people are trapped by invisible chains, the need for validation, the need to be chosen, the need to be admired, the need to be accepted, the need to win. And once someone discovers what you need, they discover how to control you. That's why approval hunger is one of the most dangerous weaknesses a man can carry. The moment praise becomes fuel, your steering wheel leaves your hands. Compliments begin directing you, recognition begins directing you, and acceptance begins directing you. You stop making decisions based on your mission, you start making decisions based on applause. Machiavelli understood that a man who cannot govern himself will always be governed by something else, and for most people, that something else is emotional attachment. Attachment blinds, detachment clarifies. Attachment creates tunnel vision, detachment creates options. When you're attached, every closed door feels like a disaster. When you're detached, every closed door becomes information. You recover faster, you adapt faster, and you move faster, because your identity never became trapped inside a single outcome. Remember this, the strongest negotiator isn't the smartest man in the room. The strongest negotiator is the one who can lose the deal and sleep peacefully that night. The strongest man isn't the one who always wins. It's the one who remains internally unchanged whether he wins or loses, because when your peace no longer depends on the outcome, nobody can use the outcome against you. Number 6. Building silent strength. One of the most dangerous mistakes a man can make is confusing attention with progress. Modern culture rewards visibility. It rewards announcements, declarations, public goals, public struggles, and public ambitions. Everyone wants to be seen building, but very few are willing to disappear and actually build. And that's exactly why silent men become dangerous. Let me tell you something most people never notice. The moment you announce a goal, the world changes, not dramatically, but subtly. You tell people you're starting a business, you want to get in shape, you plan to make more money, or you have a bigger vision for your future. watch what happens next. Some people smile, some people encourage you, but beneath the surface, three invisible forces immediately appear: comparison, doubt, and resistance. Not because everyone hates you, but because your growth becomes a mirror, and mirrors make people uncomfortable. The uncomfortable truth is that many people support your dreams only as long as those dreams remain smaller than their excuses. The moment your actions threaten to expose their lack of action, the energy changes. Questions appear, criticism appears, and unsolicited advice appears. Crutchling parpisnexen for the why your plan won't work. This is why intelligent men learn to protect momentum. Not every vision deserves an audience. Not every goal deserves an announcement. Some things grow better in darkness. Think about a seed. The strongest part of its development happens underground, invisible, silent, and protected. Nobody applauds it. Nobody validates it. Nobody even knows it's happening. Yet that's where the real transformation occurs. Most men want applause before achievement. And that's where they lose. Because talking about goals creates a dangerous illusion. The brain receives a small reward for discussing success before success actually exists. You feel productive, you feel accomplished, you feel like you're moving, but nothing has been built. The satisfaction arrives before the work, and when satisfaction arrives early, hunger disappears. That's why loud ambition often produces weak results. The man becomes addicted to talking, the silent man becomes addicted to execution, and execution always wins. Machiavelli understood something that remains true centuries later. People respect visible results far more than verbal intentions. Nobody cares what you plan to do, nobody cares what you're about to become, nobody cares what you're working on. They care about what exists. That's the brutal reality. Results end arguments, results silence critics, and results create authority. Everything before that is noise. One of the greatest advantages of moving quietly is underestimation. Most men are terrified of being underestimated. They shouldn't be. Underestimation is camouflage. When people think you're average, they stop paying attention. When they stop paying attention, they lower their guard. And when they lower their guard, you gain space to grow without interference. The strongest moves often happen in silence. The promotion nobody expected, the physique nobody saw coming, the business nobody knew existed, the transformation nobody believed was possible. Shock creates impact because nobody saw the preparation. They only saw the result, and that's exactly how it should be. There is another reason silent strength matters. It forces you to build your identity without applause, without validation, without encouragement, and without an audience. That changes a man. Because eventually he stops working for recognition. He starts working because his standards demand it. And a man driven by standards is far more dangerous than a man driven by attention. Attention disappears, standards remain. So build quietly, train quietly, and improve quietly. Let people underestimate you, let them misread you, let them think nothing is happening. Then one day, let the results speak a language no explanation ever could. Number 7, becoming untouchable. This is the stage most men never reach. Not because it's impossible, but because it requires killing a version of yourself that you've carried for years. The version that needs approval, the version that needs to be understood, the version that needs to be understood, the version that needs the last word, and the version that secretly believes peace comes from controlling other people. It doesn't. Real power begins when you stop trying to control the outside world and start becoming impossible for the outside world to control. That's what being untouchable really means. Not cold, not emotionless, not isolated, untouchable. There is a difference. Most men spend their lives getting pulled in different directions by forces they barely notice. A text changes their mood, a compliment changes their confidence, a rejection destroys their momentum, and a criticism ruins their entire day. They're not living from their center. They're living from reactions. They're emotional leaves being carried by psychological wind. An untouchable man operates differently. He still feels everything, but he obeys almost nothing. Read that again. He still feels everything, but he obeys almost nothing. That's the shift. A disrespectful comment enters his awareness. But it doesn't hijack his behavior. A betrayal hurts. But it doesn't destroy his judgment. A rejection stings. But it doesn't redefine his identity. Information arrives, analysis follows, and action comes last. Most people reverse the sequence. They feel first, react second, and regret third. The untouchable man does the opposite, and that single reversal changes the entire trajectory of his life. Think about the men who constantly end up in drama, the endless arguments, the emotional explosions, the need to prove themselves, and the need to win every battle. Look closely, and you'll discover something. They're not fighting other people. They're fighting themselves. Every argument is really a wounded ego demanding validation. Every overreaction is really an unhealed insecurity defending itself. Every emotional outburst is a loss of internal command. The strongest men eventually understand something uncomfortable. Not every attack deserves a response. Not every disrespect deserves a confrontation. Not every betrayal deserves revenge. Sometimes the highest form of power is strategic indifference. Because attention is expensive, and every person you obsess over is charging rent inside your mind. Untouchable men become ruthless about access. Not access to their money, but access to their attention, access to their emotions, access to their time, and access to their energy. This is where most people get it wrong. They think self-respect is a feeling. It isn't. Self-respect is a filter. It determines who enters, who stays, who leaves, and who never gets access in the first place. As you evolve, something strange begins to happen. You argue less, explain less, and defend less. You stop trying to convince people of your value. You stop trying to correct every misunderstanding. You stop trying to save every relationship because you realize something powerful. The right people don't require endless proof, and the wrong people will never be convinced anyway. Pressure no longer speeds you up. Praise no longer intoxicates you. Fear no longer corners you. You become steady, predictable to yourself, and unpredictable to everyone else. That's when manipulators lose interest. Because manipulators need emotional movement, they need reactions, they need access points, they need openings, and you no longer provide them. Your nervous system changes too. Situations that once created anxiety now create observation. Situations that once created panic now create strategy. What used to trigger emotion now triggers awareness. And eventually, composure stops being something you perform. It becomes who you are. Remember this: untouchable does not mean nobody can speak to you. It means nobody can move you without your permission. No pressure enters without evaluation. No influence enters without inspection. No person enters without standards. That is the final evolution of personal power. Calm mind, guarded access, and an unshakable center. The world can knock on the door, but it no longer gets a key. You've just reached the point where most people stop, not because they disagree, and not because they don't understand, because they realize what this actually requires. It's easy to listen to these ideas, it's much harder to live them. And that's the line that separates spectators from operators. Most men love the feeling of transformation, but very few love the process that creates it. They love hearing about discipline. They hate practicing it when nobody is watching. They love the idea of emotional control, but they hate holding their tongue when their ego is screaming for revenge. They love the concept of becoming untouchable. They hate the price of becoming untouchable because the price is uncomfortable. The price is letting go of the addiction to validation, the addiction to being understood, the addiction to proving yourself, the addiction to winning every argument, and the addiction to being chosen. That's the part nobody talks about. Most men spend years trying to become stronger while secretly feeding the very weaknesses that keep them vulnerable. They want peace, but they feed drama. They want power, but they chase approval. They want respect, but they negotiate their standards. They want freedom, but they remain emotionally dependent on people who have no authority over their lives. And then they wonder why they feel trapped. Look back at your own life for a moment. How many nights have you lost sleep over someone who wasn't losing sleep over you? How many hours have you spent replaying conversations that the other person forgot 5 minutes later? How many decisions have you made because of fear? Fear of rejection, fear of criticism, Fear of being alone, fear of missing out. Most men will never answer those questions honestly, because the answers expose where they're still controlled. And that's what this entire video has really been about: control. Not controlling others, controlling yourself. Because here's the secret most people discover too late. The strongest man in the room is rarely the loudest, rarely the most aggressive, and rarely the most emotional. The strongest man is usually the one who needs the least, the one who can walk away, the one who can remain calm when others lose composure, the one who doesn't need recognition to continue his mission, the one whose decisions cannot be purchased with praise or manipulated through fear. That is real power. And once you see it, you start noticing something fascinating. The world is full of people reacting. Reacting to headlines, reacting to opinions, reacting to social pressure, reacting to criticism, reacting to attention, and reacting to rejection. Most people are being pulled through life by invisible strings they don't even know exist. The few who become dangerous are the ones who cut those strings, piece by piece, year by year, decision by decision. That's why emotional control is not weakness, it's leverage. Silence is not weakness, it's positioning. Detachment is not indifference, it's freedom. It's freedom. And self-respect is not a feeling, it's a system that determines what enters your mind, who gets access to your energy, and what deserves your attention. Remember this: being untouchable isn't about dominating every room you enter. It's about refusing to surrender ownership of your mind. Because noise will always exist, manipulation will always exist, temptation will always exist, provocation will always exist. The question is whether they still have access to you. If this video sharpened your thinking, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with a man who needs this message. Because most people will hear these principles and move on. Only a few will apply them, and those few will quietly become impossible to control. Drop this final affirmation in the comments. Calm mind. Controlled moves. Unshakable standards. Stay measured, stay aware, stay unreadable, and above all, never give the world the keys to your mind.